Welcome to the 9th lesson of the course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils and ecosystems at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. These are ideas, these are questions, these are methods of thinking. This is not investment advice. Today we're going to look at ecosystem payments for farmers, meaning if, and probably that is the case, it's not enough that we're going to hopefully pay a bit more to farmers or pay more directly and make sure more money that we pay for our food, our fibers, and our oils get to the farm gate. But that's only for the produce. That's only for the biomass that comes off the farm. If that's not enough, can we start paying our farmers for the carbon they store, the water they store, the biodiversity they increase? Because if you have a healthy soil, the biodiversity will explode both underneath and above. And biodiversity is absolutely key for our survival. We're starting to figure out slowly but surely. Water storage. If your soil is healthier, you store a lot more water, which in these times of drought and flooding is key. You basically build a water carbon sponge, and healthy soils store a lot of carbon. So are there ways, and is the time right to start paying farmers for these types, and maybe for the other returns they create in the non-financial returns, the non-financial impact they are having by being a soil farmer? Because, like I said before, probably paying a bit more for food or paying more directly for food, so having shorter supply webs, etc., isn't good enough or isn't enough. If you have been following this course, you know that we use a number of frameworks to see if this theme, in this case, the payments for ecosystem services for farmers, if that's a crucial theme to focus on. I think yes, and I would like you to walk you through our decision-making framework, why we decided to focus a lot of our podcasts actually on this theme. So we're using a number of different frameworks to basically see why this is so important. We're using ITN, which is importance, tractability, and neglectedness. Don't worry, I struggle every single time with that word. We're going to look into that a bit more detail. We're going to look how this payments for ecosystem services scores on these. We're looking at leverage points of Donella Meadows, and we're trying to answer the question, why now? Did something change compared to 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, 50 years ago? Because we have been talking about paying farmers for the aesthetics, for the ecosystem services they provide for a long time. So is the time now? Like, did something change? Which I think is a fundamental question every investor should always ask about any investments they're doing. Like, is this different than somebody has tried it before? So looking at the ITN framework, which is something used by 80,000 hours as well, like what you spend your career on, I'm putting the links below if you want to dive deeper. We recorded a full episode of this course, a full lesson, just looking at these frameworks. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend looking at that. And I highly recommend, honestly, to build your own framework, to really go through the process. What do I find important? How do I filter? How do I select? Because there's so much out there. We could be spending all of our time in one piece of the regeneration movement and not looking at the others and not making the conscious decision that that piece is the most important. I think we have a limited amount of resources. We need to focus what is absolutely essential. And we have to leverage our personal fit, our resources, our time, our energy, our money, to have the most impact and to have the most impact on regeneration. So I think it's crucial that everybody builds their own decision-making framework. This is the one I've built personally, super personal. You can play with it. I will share the links and all of that. But again, build your own and make sure you build your own decision-making framework. So we're looking at importance and scale. So if we would solve this problem, in this case, payment systems for farmers, how much better would the world be? Like, is this an important problem to work on? Tractability/solvability. Like, is it solvable? And can we trace that? Is it actually something we can fix? Or do we have to wait still for some technology to come or some markets to develop, et cetera, et cetera? So how solvable, how fixable is this? And then neglectedness. How many other people are working on it? Because that would mean if a lot of people are working on it, it probably means that your or our extra contribution is not going to be so significant, or is unlikely to be significant, because a lot of other people, a lot of other smart people probably are also working on it. Then personal fit. How does it fit with you? And would you wake up and then all the mornings over the next 50 years to work on it or not? Then leverage points. Where in the system, in a complex system, which is the global food and agriculture space, obviously, is it possible with a small shift to have a huge and big change? And that's something we try to answer and give it basically a number of points. So when we look at the 80,000 hour framework, the ITN, importance, scale, tractability, solvability, and neglectedness, these are the scores I gave it, and we'll go over them one by one. And it got a total of 22. If you remember, the nutrient density we looked at and the landscape restoration got a higher score. That's why they're higher in my framework. And I try to focus on them more. But this also got a very high score compared to all the other themes we looked at. So if we look at the importance and scale, I give it a 10, which is pretty high, but not extremely high, because I think it's a fundamental shift, but it's an extra. I mean, the fundamental shift needs to happen on the farm and needs to happen for other reasons, not just for the extra payments. But we could also argue it's a 12 because it could unleash an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of creativity among farmers if we start paying them for this. So this is, again, a personal one. I tried to be conservative with these numbers, and I gave it a 10 and not a 12 or a 14, because in my understanding, it could have less of an impact compared to some of the other themes we've looked at. If we look at tractability and solvability, so how solvable, how fixable is this? I give it a 4. If we look at how much money and how much resources are already spent on it, we will look at that at the next one. And if we would double that, then I think we would fix about 1% of the problem, not 10% of the problem, because at the moment there's a limited market for these credits, for carbon removal credits, for biodiversity, etc. There's a lot of interest, but we still have to prove a lot of these things. So that brings us to neglectedness, and I gave it a 6, which means that the current spending on it, I think, is around 100 million, and probably more than 1,000 people or 1,000 people are working on it. There are a lot of people supporting it, but we're still in the early stages of development here. We don't know if the markets will pick up. We don't know if all these pledges of big companies that want to go carbon neutral, etc., if that would translate actually in investments in soil or not. So there's a lot to see here, and I wanted to be conservative and gave it a 6, not, for example, an 8, which makes it more urgent. We could argue it's maybe an 8, and if you would be really strict, even less people would be seriously working on it. But it's getting a lot of buzz. I mean, the Cargills of this world, the Danones, a lot of people are at least saying a lot of things. Let's see if they actually put money to work, if they actually start buying these ecosystem services from farmers. And then the personal fit, I gave it a 2. I think I'm reasonably fit for the field. I'm quite motivated and have some relevant skills, but definitely not a 4. I'm not the perfect person in this area to dive deeper into it. Then on leverage points, I think it's a 7. And just to remind you, let's look into that. The lower, the better in this case. So if it would be a 1 or a 2, it would be better, would get higher in the system, a higher score. And in this case, it changes positive feedback loop. I think you can argue that if we pay farmers for doing better things, that's a positive feedback loop. Maybe in a while, you could move to a 5, like we changed the rules of the system, so there will be incentives and punishments. There are no punishments now. Everybody can pollute whatever they want. And you could even argue, if the market would be strong enough, you could move to a 3. Like, it changes the goals of the system. But we're not there yet, I think. I can safely say we're around 7 in this case. And then why now? I think this is absolutely crucial question everybody should always ask themselves. And I think there are 2 points that make this an interesting why now question. Still very early, but it seems to be, like I mentioned before, markets are moving. And it seems to be people are paying. I last year, for instance, bought my carbon removal credits for the travel I did. Unfortunately, I had to fly a number of times. And I bought carbon storage credits from Nori. And it was super, super easy. So it's possible. And many other people have followed. It's still small, but it's going. And there's some other companies that are setting a marketplace, and I will show them in a minute. And it seems to be that this double counting, which happens often with the CO2 credits, is fixable, at least in theory, through the blockchain. So we might have the technology to make it measurable. We don't sell these credits twice, the removal credits, if we talk about carbon, to make it very transparent. And we might also have some of the measurement tools to measure the actual carbon in the soil, which is still a question mark. And we might have the markets. So you heard me say might a few times. We're not there yet, but it's very exciting and very interesting. And if you're interested in this, there are definitely a few interviews that I can highly recommend to dive deeper into. We interviewed Paul Gamble of Nori, and we interviewed a long time ago, and I do need to do an update with them, Gregory Landau of Regen Network. And they have a very extensive website, all of them actually. So we have Nori, we have a great podcast, the Carbon Removal podcast. Regen Network has made a lot of progress. And Soil Heroes and the Soil Heroes Foundation have a lot of information. I'm interviewing them soon. So maybe when this is out, actually we have some interviews, so check the website. Full disclosure, I'm an advisor at Soil Heroes. And again, I've repeated this, I think, 100 times. The No Regrets Initiative has an enormous amount of information on soil health. And a big part of that is also about carbon storage, carbon payments, etc. It's truly a magnificent library of papers, videos, scientific papers, anything you can possibly imagine. So definitely find out more and click on the playlist. We have created a playlist just for this sub-theme, payment systems for farmers. We'll be adding new interviews like the ones with Soil Heroes, and we'll basically be up to date there. So if you're interested in digging deeper, find the playlist and find more information, find more up-to-date information on that theme. And that's it for today. Thank you for following along. Thank you for your interest in regenerative agriculture. Find out more on the website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com. Get in touch if you have feedback, Twitter, LinkedIn, comments below, email through the website. And remember, pay what you think it's worth if you have the means. And next time we'll look at transition finance for farmers, the fourth theme we're diving deeper into, and also the last one we're focusing on in terms of the podcast. So I hope to see you next time, and we're going to find out how to finance all of the themes we've discussed so far. Thank you very much.